He was special needs, and they were still trying to take his booty. This is the story of Leroy. No, not that Leroy. White boy Leroy. Now tell me when I said Leroy, you didn't think I was talking about a black dude. This is Louisiana, where they got white Leroys and white Tyrones. Man, welcome to prison, where a special needs inmate got the whole cell block shook up as they try to turn him out. This is the story. It was Allen Correctional Center. And if you knew anything about Allen Correctional Center, it was a chaotic little camp. It was wild. Dudes were fighting, gambling. There was punks on every tier. The weekends were just wild and crazy. And when Leroy made it to the compound and in the dorm, he stood out immediately. He was a diminutive fellow, about 5'6", little short dude. He wasn't big. He was average stature for his height. He wasn't fat or anything like that. He was just a, regular stocky little dude. But what stood out with Leroy more than anything else is that Leroy was special needs. And you could tell he was special needs as soon as he walked in. Because when he walked into the dormitory, he just had that look on his face, kind of like this. And everybody's looking like, man, what's wrong with that dude? And he's like, and that's when another little short dude walks up to him, the dorm orderly. That's right, another little short dude named Night Ward Shorty Black from the ghetto, a.k.a. Pimp Shorty. That's right, this dude's name was literally Ninth Ward Shorty Black from the ghetto, a.k.a. Pimp Shorty. So Night Ward Shorty Black from the ghetto, a.k.a. Pimp Shorty, who's about the same height as Leroy, except he's black, walks up to Leroy and he's like, and Night Ward Shorty Black from the ghetto, a.k.a. Pimp Shorty, he had this underbite like this. The bottom of his mouth the bottom of his jaw used to protrude, like almost even with his nose, like it was a real bad underbite. And it went all the way. And when he talked with them teeth crashed like this. And he walked up to Leroy, who just came into the dorm, and he's like, say, bro, what bunk you in? Say, bro, what bunk you in? And Leroy's like, he said, say, bro, why you standing there with your mouth open? I can put something in your mouth, yeah. And Leroy goes, And I was said, man, what's wrong with this boy? I said, bro, you retarded or something? And Leroy says, And at that moment, I'm looking and the rest of the dorm's looking. And they're like, say, Night Ward, the white boy, he got special needs, you heard me? Because other dudes were coming into the dorm with him. And they just came from reception. And when you first come to the prison, you got to go see the reception. Even though you came from reception at Hunt Correctional Center, when you get to the prison you're going to, they still put you through a processing too. And so dudes knew that Leroy was special needs. And he came up in there. And so now we're like, man, let me see what bunk you in, man. And on your paperwork, it got your bunk. He's like, oh, man, come here, follow me, boy. I'm going to show you what bed you sleep in. I'm a dorm orderly, man. I keep the place clean, you heard me? I keep the place clean. And Leroy's like, okay, you keep it clean. He said, I clean toilet too. I clean toilet. He said, what do you mean you clean the toilet, boy? You like to clean toilet? And Leroy said, I like to clean. I'm good at clean. And Night Ward said, yeah, you're going to find a job up in here. I'm going to find something for you to do, you heard me? And so Leroy goes to his bunk and he makes his bed. So he makes his bed and he's really detail orientated. This dude came into the dorm. He made his bed like he was in the military. You know what I mean? Dudes take their bunk area serious in prison, kind of like the military. But some dudes are nonchalant about it. They ain't going to, make it perfect. But Leroy had them corners folded up. You know what I mean? Perfect squares, perfect triangles. You know what I mean? Everything was in line. It looked like he was in boot camp. He made that bed up quick. Well, anyway, Night Ward Shorty Black goes up to him because he's fixated on him. I don't know how Night Ward Shorty Black from the ghetto, a.k.a. Pimp Shorty, got so fixated on Leroy, but he got fixated on him. So he walks up to him and he says, say, bro, where you from? And Leroy looks at him. Huh? Night Ward said, listen here, bro. Don't do all that hand stuff to me. I need to know where you from, bro. Everybody up in this camp right here, we all know where each other from, bro. Where you from? And Leroy said, huh? He said, boy, quit playing with me. I want to know where you're from. And Leroy said, oh, I'm from by my grandma's house. And I said, boy, you by your grandma's house? Boy, what you playing with me like that for? And Leroy says, No, I go by my grandma's house. That's where I'm really from. He said, nah, not talking about your grandma's house, boy. What city you from? Where you from, man? What's your zip code? And everybody's looking, and Leroy goes, I'm from Lafayette. I'm from Lafayette. And Nightwall said, all right, I'm going to get with you, boy. Something wrong with you, yeah? He said, I got my eye on you. I'm the dorm orderly. I keep the place clean, man. I like the way you made your bed. You made that bed perfect. I wish I could make my bed like that. You going to make my bed for me? And I'm looking at Nightwall. I'm like, Nightwall, you moving up on you seem like you moving on this little dude. He just came in here. That dude's special need, man. You ain't gonna try to make this boy a boy, huh? Anyway, the next day comes and it's time to go work in the field. And Leroy comes to the field. And in prison, when it goes to field work, they call your name and you call your DOC number out. And they call, I ain't gonna tell y'all Leroy. I remember Leroy's last name. And they call Leroy so-and-so. And he throws his DOC number. That me. And they said, what's wrong with you, son? That's what the line pushers who were calling the name and checking out their clipboard. What's wrong with you, boy? And one of the captains said, that's that special needs inmate that just got here. He said, oh, okay. He said, come on, man, what's your DOC number? And Leroy's like, 391244. And he's like, all right, get in line. And Leroy gets in line. We get in the field. Leroy is a beast. He's literally like a mule when it comes to working. We were in the field at Allen Correctional Center clearing trees and debris. We were literally chopping trees down to make more farmland so that the prisons can have more farmland to grow more crops. And we were clearing brush. And Leroy would get out there and move stumps that nobody else was moving. He would get dirty into the ground, pushing stumps, you know, as time got on. You know what I mean? It's not the first day, you know what I mean? And, you know, weeks lead to months and Leroy's still in the field. The officers loved Leroy's field work because you got to think something. The warden wants results. And the officers who are running the gun line and they pushing the line, they are being held accountable because the warden's expecting so much land to be cleared so they can start growing crops. And so Leroy is a hard worker. And so the line pusher wants Leroy out there on the line with him because they setting brush fire to all of the debris. And Leroy's a hard worker. And them dudes be telling, say, Leroy, you be jeffing for the man, you heard me? Say, but you make all this look bad. And Leroy like, nah, I just gonna work. I'm gonna work for my money. They're like, man, you ain't making no money. Well, in Louisiana, you do make money. You make like 16 cents an hour or something like that, or something absurd and ridiculous. If you have flat time, if you have good time, you ain't making no money, because good time that means depending on what you got, whether it's half time or 85% of your time, you still are getting something from the state. But if your time is flat, in other words, if you got 5 years, 50 years flat, they're going to pay you to work. They have to pay you, you know, because you're not earning anything because your time is flat. Well, Leroy, you know, he didn't have no flat time. So he worked hard, but didn't make no money. But Leroy enjoyed what he was doing. That was how he passed his time. And Leroy had a lot of time. He had like 25 to 35 years. And he kept his paperwork in his pocket. In Allen Correctional Center, you wear scrubs. Depending on what prison you go to, depending on what state clothes that they issue out. Well, Allen is a private run facility. And the private run facility, it's cheaper for them to just give inmates scrubs. So you literally, the pants and the shirt are scrubs, kind of like a nurse would wear. And they got the little pocket right here. And so some state prisons, you get jeans and blue shirts. It just depends on where you go. You know, other state prisons like Hunt, you know, DeQuincy, Angola, WCI, DCI, those places are going to have the jeans and the blue button-up shirts. But you know, Cottonport, Allen, they're going to have the places like that in Louisiana. They're going to have the scrubs. Well, the scrubs got a pocket. Well, Leroy keeps all his pertinent paperwork in his pocket. And at this point, Leroy's been on the compound for a few months. And everybody knows don't mess with Leroy's paperwork, because a couple times dudes tried to mess with Leroy's paperwork and he got in a fight behind that paperwork. That's right. This special needs dude would fight, because a dude went in there and said, man, say, Leroy, let me see what you got in that paperwork. What you got in that pocket? And the dude went to go in there and Leroy just hit him. Boom. And the dude just got on Leroy and they started fighting. He was strong. You know, he was moving them roots. And so he was fighting this dude. Dude whooped him. But Leroy didn't suffer nothing major. He went to the hole. He came back. He got his stuff in his pocket. Well, the officers were doing a pat down one day coming back in, Because when you go out in prison, you have an identification card. You keep your identification card, and it usually has a clip, and you keep it clipped to your shirt or something like that. And so when they call your name, you call your DOC number with your identification card. And so he got his identification card, and they doing a pat down, a search down coming in one day, because every so often they do like a real big strip search of the inmates coming in from the field. And they don't do it all the time. Usually it's just a pat down, but this time they're doing a strip search. And when they do a strip search, the officer tells Leroy, let me get that shirt. And Leroy's like, I don't want to get my shirt, my paperwork, my paperwork. And the officer says, Leroy, give me that shirt. And Leroy said, no, 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 no. And the officer said, he pulled Leroy's shirt from him and went to pull it and went to get the paperwork, because the officer was doing, it was a strip search. And he went to get that paperwork out of there. And when he went to get the paperwork, Leroy just punched the officer. Boom! He hit the officer. The officers hit the button. They maced him. They whooped him. They drugged Leroy half naked down to the cell block. He did not want nobody messing with that paperwork. He told that officer, he said, that's my paperwork. They had him hog-tied. He was like, his tongue was hanging like that. They had him twist-tied. You know what I mean? He had that mace all on him. He was like, And them dudes were like, man, and bang Leroy up. Leroy, man. And them dudes like, and so dudes, Nightboy Shorty back from the ghetto, a.k.a. Pimp Shorty, is completely fixated on Leroy at this point. It's been months, and Leroy's been in the dorm. And Nightboy still ain't saw that paperwork. And so one day I'm talking, Leroy comes back down the walk, you know what I mean? He gets laid down, you got in a fight with the officers, he gets laid down in a hole. He did like 10, 15 days in isolation, lost a canteen. He ain't had nobody sending him nothing anyway. All he had was his grandma. Well, Nightboy tells me one day, he said, say, bro, let me holler with you. And I was cool with Nightboy, you know? And he said, let me holler with you, bro. I said, what's up, Nightboy? He said, say, bro, check this out. He said, you see that boy Leroy? I said, what about him? He said, I know what's on that paperwork. I said, what's on that paperwork, Nightboy? He said, that boy, I promise you this here. He got one of them charges. I said, he got one of them charges? He said, yeah, he messed up with them cheering. I said, come on, Nightboy, you just can't say that about that man. He said, why else you don't want nobody to see that paperwork? He probably touched on them with the cheering. I said, Nightboy, you can't say that. I said, why don't you ask him? He said, that boy not crazy. Y'all think he crazy. Everybody in the prison think Leroy crazy except me. I said, why you say he not crazy? The people said he's special needs. You know what I mean? He's certified crazy, you know, special needs. He's born with a disability. And Nightboy said, man, them people don't know nothing. I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you how I know he's not crazy. I said, how you know he's not crazy, Nightboy? He looks at me. He said, I asked him. I said, what you asked him? He said, I said, say, Leroy, let me ask you a question. He said, that boy looked at me and said, huh? He said, you want to see that loggerhead? I said, what you asked him? He said, I asked him, he want to see my loggerhead. I said, you asked me to see the loggerhead. In prison, there's this very disturbing phenomenon where people name their private parts. Nightboy was referring to his as the loggerhead. And he said, say, Leroy, you want to see that loggerhead? And Leroy's like, no, no, no. I said, that's what he told you, Nightboy? He said, that's how I know he's not crazy. He said, because if he was crazy, he'd take it from me. I said, he'd take it? He said, yeah, a crazy person would take that thing. He said, Leroy not crazy. He got good sense. He know what it is. I said, I asked that boy to take a shower with me. I said, you asked him to take a shower with you, Nightboy? He said, I asked that boy to take a shower with me. Me and that boy took a shower. He said, I ain't taking no shower. I said, what he said? He said, oh, no, I'm not taking a shower with you. I'm like, Nightboy, you down bad, man. So finally, one day, I get it up to myself, and I didn't mess with Leroy, you know what I mean? I kept the dude, you know, at distance, you know, I didn't bother the dude. But one day I asked him, I said, Leroy, what's in that paperwork? I never reached for him or anything, you know what I mean? I just asked him, and I called a moment one day. I said, what's in that paperwork, Leroy? He said, that's my disability, my social security and my disability when I get out. I said, Leroy, you got a long time, huh? He said, yeah. He said, I didn't do it. They said I did something I didn't do, but I never did it. And I said, you never did it? And so he like, nah, I never did it. You know what I mean? And so do I think Leroy actually did what they said he did? I don't think so. I remember, you know, people came into prison and they saw his paperwork, you know, the law library people, and they said they you know, he had a charge where it was something with his, I think it was with his cousin or something, but she was older. She wasn't a juvenile. She was an older person, and she accused him of SAing her, and it was real questionable, you know what I mean? So I don't know what happened. Did he do it? Maybe, probably so. I don't know. I wasn't there, you know, but I know one thing. Wasn't nobody messing with Leroy's paperwork, and Leroy Wasn't going to let nobody turn him out. And he'll fight. That little special needs dude will fight. Welcome to the Pen and the Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube. Give me a like and subscribe. Hit that bell notification where we do things a little bit different than the rest of the genre. You know, I told this story before on my channel, but as we're gaining traction, there's some stories that I would like to tell again or, you know, reinvent so other people can hear them because they're deep in my library of videos. Man, let's get it.